This video, we're going to go into more of the basics of what is your lease royalty rate. If you're a mineral owner and you have leased your minerals to a company that's going to go operate and drill them and make a well and produce royalties for you, how do you know what amount of royalties you agreed to? Now, hopefully, if you were the one negotiating this lease, you know this because this would be one of the main amounts that you'd be negotiating. So how much of every dollar do you get paid for them being able to drill your minerals? When you own minerals, it's a property, just like your home is a property. It's kind of like renting out part of your home for someone to use for a business. And then saying, because you're using my home, you're using my materials, I don't want to operate this business, but you are using my stuff. In exchange for you being able to use my stuff and on my property, you give me 20 cents of every dollar that you make, we'll call it even. That's basically what a lease is doing. You're not selling your minerals, but it is a conveyance. So you are the lessor, the person who is leasing to someone, and then the lessee is the person who is receiving the lease. What we're going to be looking at today is several leases. We're going to start way back in time. So these leases can be active for a very long time. I've seen leases that are 100 years old that are still active because there's been a well producing for 100 years. Or whatever is needed to be held on the lease is happening and it's still active. If you're in an area that's been producing for a very long time, and you have production and your grandma had production and her mom had production, there's probably a lease that was signed a long, long time ago that's still in place. And that is what you're held to now. You can't renegotiate it for the most part. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I'm an engineer, but I'm not your engineer. This is just free YouTube advice. Take it for what it's worth. I'll just say it's very hard to get out of these leases. The thing is, leases can take whatever form and shape you want the lease to look like. So the lease is your chance to put everything you want in there as your terms of how you're going to let people operate your property and use your property. If your house is sitting there right next to where they're going to be drilling, you want to have a lot of terms saying what they can do to the land, because this is your chance. The lease is the operating agreement saying, here's how things are going to go down, and this is what we're going to be held to. Here's how much we're going to pay you. Here's what depths we're going to drill. Here's what we're going to do with the water. Here's how deep we're going to bury the pipelines. If we're going to build you a pool or not, everything should be in this lease. If you don't own the surface where this lease is, and that's very common these days, you might not have cared how deep they bury the pipelines. You're like, I don't care. But think about if you are signing a lease today, think about the people who are living there. If there are people living there, talk to them about this. Likely, if you're watching this video, you already have a lease and you're curious, what is the lease royalty at this point? Because that's one of the main input into value. If we go back to that example, you have a person in your house that's running a business and you're getting 20 cents of every dollar they make. It makes a big difference if it's 20 cents, 25 cents, 15 cents, 12 cents per dollar. That makes a big difference on how much you're going to be making from that person. So that royalty rate is how much in royalties you're going to be receiving for doing absolutely nothing. Kind of like a royalty on a song. Honestly, I don't know many people that have like a direct experience with royalties on songs, but if you're one of those people who receives a royalty on a song, maybe a book, maybe a thought, concept, drawing, I don't know. But it's the same idea where for somebody using your thing, you're getting paid a certain amount, even though you're just sitting there at your home doing nothing related to that anyway. I'm sure you're doing something. As a side note, I'm wearing my Women in Science pin because Women in Science. And I got really excited the other day because my daughter, who is almost 7, told me that she wanted to do what I do when she grows up. And I was like, oh, great. She wants to be an engineer. She wants to go in the sciences. I'm doing the good mom thing. And then she told me, yeah, she wants to be a YouTuber just like I am. Well, she's not wrong. I do put out videos. It is what it is. Let's go ahead and look at the first lease. Now, we're going to be looking at multiple different states, multiple different time frames, different situations of the leases. Again, these leases can take all different sizes and shapes and wording. There is no standard lease. Anyone who's telling you there's a standard lease is lying. They might have a standard lease, but there is no universal standard lease. There are things that are more common in leases, but that doesn't make it standard. This first one we're looking at is from back in 1963. This is in Duchesne County, Utah. It's an oil and gas lease that should be pretty clear. Oil and gas lease across the top. Usually when they're older than like 1990, usually the entire lease is filed in public record. I pulled this from public record. Everything here is public record. Some of the later, like more recent leases, I am redacting some of the information, even though it's public for privacy's sake. But this stuff here, this is all public record. You can go and pull it. This is saying that this person leased to Shell Oil Company this property here with this description, and that property contains 320 gross acres. So I have a video on net versus gross acres, but that's basically saying if you were to put a fence around what is described here, it would be 320 acres. It's like saying if this was a publicly traded company, it's a 320 share size company, but they might have only 10 shares. They might have all 320 shares. And honestly, a lot of these older leases tend to be closer to net equals gross. That is a tangent. What we're looking for is what royalty they leased it for. And this is saying that how many cents on the dollar is the person going to get for any amount of oil and gas extracted. So this is very tiny text. You might need a magnifying glass. Hopefully you have your computer where you can just, zoom right on in and get it even blurrier. This is very hard to read, but I'm going to turn on my little highlighter mouse thing so you can see what I'm pointing at here. But in this really blurry paragraph here, you can kind of see it. Lessee shall deliver to the something of lessor a royalty. That is the word royalty. But what's important here is the equal 1/8. 1/8. And you can see, again, it will mention pay lessor for such 1/8. Typically, there's one paragraph talking about oil, one paragraph talking about gas. Usually the royalty percentages are the same for gas and oil, but they're just clarifying oil is this percentage, gas is this percentage, any liquids that come off the gas is this percentage, and all the percentages are usually the same. So if you can find one, this one says 1/8. And I'll also give you a hint. Usually if it's 1980s or earlier, it's 1/8. Now I said there wasn't a standard lease, but there were some common terms that were used. So 1/8 was a very common royalty percentage that was used earlier on. Now 1/8 is also equal to 12.5%. So if you see 12.5% or 1/8, those are the same. Because of how common 1/8 was, all the way up until the 80s or 90s. 1/8 is the benchmark that people use to put everything apples to apples. Because after that point, people started getting more creative with how much royalties they were asking for, started asking for more, different terms, yada, yada. But because that royalty affects the value of the property so much, that you can standardize that royalty to a 1/8 royalty using a certain calculation. Maybe I'll put it on the screen somewhere over here. But that is called a net royalty acre versus a net mineral acre. A net royalty acre assumes it's leased at 1/8, while a net mineral acre assumes it's leased at whatever it's leased at. We'll get off of this hard to read one. This was 1/8. All right, now we are in Weld County, Colorado. We have moved up in time to 1970 and still very, very tiny text, but a little bit easier to read this time. I will zoom in even more to help y'all see. Okay, this person is leasing to Beaver Mesa Exploration. It's the northeast quarter of Section 26, Township 3 North, 65 West, containing 160 acres. Now remember, we said that was just if you were to fence in those acres, not necessarily that she should get paid for 160 acres. Just saying that is the description of the land. She owns some fraction of that 160 acres. This is saying she's leasing it for a term of 5 years. So this paragraph 3, this is saying what the lease royalty is for oil. So you have 1/8 royalty. Remember what I said before 1980s, 1990s, most everything was 1/8. Again, this is 1/8. Paragraph 4 talks about gas. So any gas produced from any oil well or used by the lessee for the manufacture of gasoline. So anything that comes out of the well should be paid also 1/8 royalty. And this is very, very, very tiny. Well, let's try to zoom in on that just to show this is 1/8 of the market value. You'll also see terms sometimes saying 1/8 at the mouth of the well. Whatever 1/8 of the value is right there at the well, like right at the well bore, whatever the value is there, they'll pay you 1/8 of. But if they take it somewhere else and they make it more valuable by doing stuff to it, you have to pay your fair share of getting it to that place to make it more valuable, but then you get 1/8 of that too. That's post-production costs, by the way. That's another term we'll get into later, but 1/8. Okay, moving on. I'm probably taking way too long on these things, but this can be really confusing and I want to make sure that y'all get plenty of examples of what we're looking at. Okay, now we are in Payne County, Oklahoma, 1986, March 4th. That was a good month. Won't say why. This is the west half of the southwest quarter. That's how you read this nonsense here. The west half of the southwest quarter. So if you were to draw a box, cut it into fourths, you're looking at the southwest quarter of that box. And then of that box you just made, you're looking at the west half of it, right? So that's a section 34, 18 north, 1 east. And that little fenced in area is 80 acres. Again, this is the gross acreage. May or may not, this Miss Virginia may or may not own all 80 acres. Might be her brother, her cousin, and her second cousin all share 20 acres. We don't know that. It is a term of 5 years and to deliver free of cost into the pipeline, which it may connect its wells, the 1/8 part of all oil produced and saved from the lease premise. So it is a 1/8 oil lease, and then also it is a 1/8 gas lease, so 1/8. And then also it says, okay, if there's gasoline that's used, that's also 1/8. And then it goes into all these other terms. And there can be a lot of terms that follow this, and they all mean something important. And I hope if you are negotiating a lease right now, you're working with an attorney very familiar with that state that you are leasing in, because every state has little nuances of things that can and can't be included, how to word it, etc. You can't just copy and paste and hope that it all works. Yeah, all these terms are very important, and it should be much longer than what you're looking at here. So this is only a 1-page lease. All right, now on to a 1998 lease. All right, this is another very, very tiny one. 1998. Thanks, Crystal. 1998, we're starting to get into some of the more sophisticated leases, but this is not one of them. Just an example, this is from Jim Wells, Texas. It's in South Texas. And here's the description of the land, containing 10 acres. Again, very, very, very tiny. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. Zoom out a little more than that, I guess. Who thinks it's 1/8? Oh, who guessed 1/8? You were wrong. So here's what's happening. You see right here, it says 1/8, but it's scratched out. To deliver the credit of the lessor in the pipeline, which lessee may connect its wells, the equal 1/8 part, but that's scratched out. And in its place is 1/5. So that's 20%. So like I was saying, after the 1990s or after the 1980s, people started getting a little more creative, a little costs started going up. There was a little more competition to get these leases, and people started paying more. This is a 1/5 lease. And this is very important that this is noted here. 1/8 is not used and 1/5 is used. So instead of 12.5% of every dollar, you're getting 20% of every dollar. So instantly your lease is worth that much more. Your land is worth that much more. Your minerals are worth that much more because you leased it at higher. If you went from 10% lease to 20% lease, it literally doubled the value of that lease. That math works. Okay. 1999. Now, this is something that a lot of y'all might run into, where you might not have the lease, and when you go into county records, all you have is a memorandum of an oil and gas lease. All you'll see here is just there's not all those words and paragraphs and whatnot. This is just letting everyone know in county records that a lease has been signed and executed, but they chose not to make it public information. And the only thing they're making public information is this stuff below, that this person leased to this person on this date. And here's how you find these two people. And here is the Exhibit A is listing out the things that were leased. If someone wants to go into county records and see, oh, is this leased or not? They can see that it's leased. They can see who has the lease. They can see who gave them the lease, and they can see what was included in that lease, but they can't see what terms were used. And that is sometimes to protect the lessee and lessor. Maybe if there's certain terms they want to keep private, maybe there's certain things that they don't want disclosed. Maybe they spent a lot of money coming up with those lease agreement terms, and they don't want to make that public. There's a lot of reasons why people might choose to make their lease not public. But if that was the case, and you would just have this memorandum of oil and gas lease, and this nowhere does it say what the royalty rate is. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does say that so-and-so leased to so-and-so for 1/5. It doesn't say much more than that, or it might say it's a 5-year term leased at 1/8. It might give some of the key things that the lease talks about, how long is the lease, what the royalty rate is of the lease, but it might not go into the details of all the different terms that can be in there. So if this is what you have, you are out of luck. If this is all you have, you could reach out to the company operating the wells and ask what your royalty rate is, or ask for a copy of the lease. You might be able to back into what your lease royalty rate is if you are getting paid on certain wells and you know for certain how many minerals acres you own. There's 4 parts to the equation: how many net acres you own, how big the unit is for that well, what your royalty rate is in those acres, and then all of those equate to what you're getting paid on for the well. So if you know those 4 things, if you know 3 of those 4, you can back into the 4th. At some point, I want to put a little calculator on my website, but for right now, just email me if you're having trouble with that. Moving on to 2010, and at this point I am starting to redact some of the names and addresses just because we are getting more modern leases. So this is an example of how thorough you can explain the lease. There's pros and cons to being very thorough in your lease. On one hand, you get everything very defined up front. On the other hand, it might get too complicated for them to actually do the things you're asking them to do. And you might not even be able to follow along with what you're asking them to do. Maybe the only people who understand what's going on is the lawyer who wrote the lease. And if that's the case, then you only can do anything about it if you involve lawyers, and then it gets really expensive. So only do this type of lease if you have a big enough portfolio that it makes sense to include lawyers and fight the little details if that becomes a thing. This is the beginning of more modern leases. This is from McMullen County, Texas. So we're looking at a Texas lease. When we have these more modern leases, you have a little more structure to it, but it's the same general idea where this person leased to this person on this date. Here is the description of the land. Here is 655.5 gross acres. There's some exceptions. Here's the primary term. It's a 3-year primary term. The royalties. Here you go. Royalties. They spell it out in these newer leases where it's a little easier. So the royalties this is a 25% of produced and saved from said lands. Now, a lot of this other stuff, and you'll see like 25%, 25% on condensate also. 25% is the baseline for all the different products that are being produced for this lease. A lot of the other terms in here are going into when that 25% is calculated, if that's beef at the mouth of the well, if that's when they sell to a third party, what is included in all those things. Well, what if they use some of the fuel for their truck? The nitpicky stuff, that means a lot, and that's the post-production costs. I would pay very close attention to that. But right now we're just looking at the royalty rate. So this is a 25% lease royalty rate for this lease. So the one we just looked at was 1/5. This is 1/4. So we're back to the tiny text, but in this case we have 1/4, and they make it bold so you can see it really easily that it's 1/4. We have this person leased to this person. Here's the lands they leased. It was 1,760 acres. Gross acreage is a 3-year term, and it's leased with a 1/4 or 25% lease royalty. Again, all of this other stuff is going into how and when they decide where that what the 25% is from. Right. Now we're looking at a 2012 Monroe County, Ohio lease. Slightly different format. We're looking at stuff from the East Coast. Things kind of go in waves. People will use the same template. Again, no standard template, but there are normal, regular templates. So now we're looking at this person leasing to XTO in 2012. Everything will say like leasing for the consideration of $1, $10. That's not what they actually leased for usually. That's just saying that they paid some amount of money that was more than this amount. There's some legal things that go into whether if they paid for it versus if it was gifted. So this is just saying it was not a gift. They paid for it. And it was 40.33 acres. Exhibit A explains what lands are being leased, and they go into a little more detail. Primary term of 5 years, and then it goes into a royalty of 12.5%. Now, one of the reasons I pulled this lease was to show this example. Right here, it shows 12.5%. There's no like line crossing it out like we saw before where they crossed it out and said 1/5. It just says 12.5%. But what's important is that documents need to be looked at as the entire document. You can't just look at one page and interpret the document with just the one page. You need the entire document in order to properly determine how it should be interpreted. So if we looked at this entire document and you keep scrolling, so everything says 12.5% here, but if we keep scrolling, there's an addendum. This addendum adds to that lease. And what it can do is say, okay, we said those things above, but anything we say down here overrides anything we said above. The wording really matters because it might not work that way depending on the wording, but most of the time the intention is for the addendum to, oh yeah, here we go. If there's a conflict between the terms printed on the lease and the addendum shall control. If it said 12.5% above, but we say something else in the addendum, that's what's going to run things from now on. They're going into some of the terms, how freshwater and ditching and plumbing and all the disposal, injection, ponds and lakes, shut-ins, ad valorem, bonus considerations, and terms and royalties. So here, the royalty and gas measurement, as royalties, lessee agrees to deliver free of cost to lessor at the wells or to credit of lessor at the pipeline to which the wells may be connected, 19%, which is the royalty percentage, aka the lease royalty rate. This 19% overrides the 12.5%, and instead of getting 12.5 cents per dollar, you're getting 19 cents per dollar. That greatly improves the value of this lease by this being there. Now we're going into a very modern lease. This is 2020 in Panola County, Texas. And this is, again, very, very tiny text, but the same thing applies as we've seen before. So-and-so leases to so-and-so. Here is the amount of land that's been leased. See addendum. So there is an addendum. So make sure you're looking at the whole document. And if the addendum's not attached to this, hey, there is one. Go find it. 30 gross acres. And this one, they actually specify gross acres. That's good. They specify that this is not the net acres. So if we're agreeing to pay you $1,000 per net acre, and we're saying that there's 30 acres here, you might not get $30,000 if you don't own all 30 acres of it. This is 30 gross acres, subject to a 3-year term. It's a paid-up lease, which means instead of getting a yearly amount, you're just getting everything all up front. And it is a 1/5 lease. So 1/5, 1/5, 1/5. That's just saying oil, gas, and everything else is 1/5. And we didn't really do this in the other ones because I did this off camera, but you'd want to look through the entire lease, make sure there's no other addendums. Normally, if it's 1/5 up here, that's probably what it is. If you see 1/8 on a more modern lease, like after 1990, check if it was scratched out or an addendum added to change it, because that was very, very common after that, to use some template and then modify it. But yeah, this one's addendum just talks about continuous development and what happens at the end of the primary term and what happens with horizontal wells. So with that, I think that's plenty of examples for today. Leave me a comment if I missed something that you'd like explained, if you have any questions on this particular topic or suggestions for future topics. I'm trying to get back into the groove of posting videos. In terms of some updates on PECAN TREE Oil Gas, we are doing great. We're very busy right now. So if you have an appraisal request, that is what we mostly do, is appraisals and valuations. We have a form, an intake form on our website that can get you to the places where get you everything we need in order to scope it and price it out for you. If you have a question, you can put questions and comments below. I get to them as I can. I do try to reply to every comment. It just might take a little bit. If you want a detailed explanation or if you want to go into some details on things, there is an Ask the Engineer option on our website right now where you can schedule an appointment, and it has different pricing for different lengths of appointments, and we can have a Zoom call and look at the documents or the questions that you have, and just I can explain what's going on or answer questions or do some quick valuations for you over the phone or Zoom, Skype, whatever works for you. We're also rolling out in stages our engineering valuation model, which is working towards getting an on-demand value report that you can pull for any minerals. Right now, it is a form that you would fill out and say you're requesting a quick look for this type of property, and it would give you a standard report for that property for a set price. It's not an appraisal, but it kind of gets you the first step of figuring out what it is, what it's worth. That is available right now on the website under the quick look report, and we'll be rolling out more in the future. So just keep your eye out for that. We're real excited about getting that going. For anyone that missed it, PECAN TREE Oil Gas now has 2 full-time employees. There's myself and my brother, Jason Hooten. He's the Chief Technology Officer of our little company, and he handles anything programming and software and web and data architecture, all those things related. We're making some big strides on that end and really excited about rolling that stuff out over the third and fourth quarter of the year. So keep an eye out for that. And we are trying to keep up with all the requests that are coming in. There's just so many people that have questions and needs in this space. You know, I hate not being able to answer all the questions. I try my best. I'm going to try to put out more videos to answer things that I can just like send a video answer to, like, hey, I made a video on that. Here you go. But in the meantime, keep sending in those questions, keep sending the emails. I look forward to talking to each and every one of you. I forgot to mention the important YouTube-y things like smash the like button and hit subscribe. It really does help get the channel out there to more people. You know, I don't actually make any money from these YouTube videos. We're too small for that. And so it just helps get the word out to more people and helps YouTube know that you're appreciating this content. So thanks and bye.